Hello and welcome to Squeaky Chair. Hello and welcome to my review of the SMC Takumar 3535. I want to double check that I'm in focus. That's close enough. I'm currently filming this on the 3535. If you didn't watch my previous video about the 2835, the Super-Takumar 2835, my goal right now is to find a good enough architectural photography lens. I'm currently working on a project that's going to require me to take a lot of pictures of large buildings, so I want to find a nice wider angle lens. The 2835 was good enough. If I wasn't renting before I bought, I would have been very happy if I just bought it. This 35 3.5, phenomenal. The Takumar 50 1.4 has magic to it. There's something special about it. It's been my daily driver for about a year now. I cannot say enough good things about it. The way it renders bokeh, the saturation of the colors, and I've heard it was a very special lens before I bought it, which is why I bought it, but I heard it was a very special lens before I got into it, but I wasn't expecting it to be that special. And I didn't expect to find another lens in the Takumar range that was that special. I know Takumars are very famous for having unique rendering and a lot of characteristics, but the 3535 checks all the boxes. It has the same magic as the 50, which is amazing, especially because it's not radioactive. Is it? You know, I have a Geiger counter at home. I'm going to double check. But it's a beautiful lens. Let's start going through some pictures I took. This first one is one of my favorites from the set. I've had this lens for about 48 hours. So I guess that this would be a first impressions, but I'm buying it, so I'm going to say it's a review. Okay, I'm very sorry about the squeaky chair. Let's get into the photos. This first one is one of my favorites from the set. It really has a nice balance to it. So I think this is a good photo to just go over the basic qualities of the lens. My favorite part of using these vintage lenses is the way they render bokeh, so let's start there. It's pretty good. It's a lot smoother and I guess less rigid than the 50, but you can see how it transitions into out of focus. It really gives you like a three-dimensional feel to it. You get a sense of depth. And a lot of lenses, the way they transition into out of focus, it doesn't really give you that. It's more of a linear transition, if I had to describe it. But here you can see it's kind of gradual, and then at the far end it's just blown out. This photo looks very sharp from a bird's eye view, but if we zoom in, I actually missed focus. None of this image is in focus. Wide open at 3.5, this lens has enough sharpness. This is taken wide open, and it's got enough sharpness to get the job done. I'm very happy with it. If we stop down, you get quite a bit more, but wide open is 3.5, so I mean, you really aren't, you're not really sacrificing much by having it wide open 3.5. I didn't notice too much chromatic aberration or fringing. I have a couple pictures that will really make those pop in a bit though. Okay, so before we move on from this one, I want to show an unedited version. This is straight out of camera. I'm using a log profile on my photos, so this isn't 100% representative, but you can still see great contrast. Like the darks are darks, the lights are lights. I'm kind of even shooting directly into light or into skylight, and we're still getting some great contrast. Good saturation, but with the processing turned back on, a nice light split tone, so the shadows are blue, highlights are yellow. I turned on the highlights on Takumars quite a bit. One moment, well, you don't need to know that. Okay, let's move to the next photos. These are just, all of these were taken with it. Here is a good example of just how sharp you can get it. Let me turn off processing, because this is sharpened digitally. Even without processing. Good contrast. The colors are kind of muted, but again, I'm shooting in a log profile, so it's to be expected. But you can get some great sharpness. There's good detail here. For such an old lens, this is pretty impressive. Okay. There's a couple that I want to just go through specifically. Here, I'm shooting on a helicoid adapter. Without a helicoid adapter, you cannot get this type of background. This rose is probably, I want to say like 5 inches, 4 or 5 inches from the front element. At 3.5, you just can't get this kind of blown out background without a helicoid adapter. So if you're thinking about picking one of these up and you are a bokeh addict just like me, I highly recommend mounting it with a helicoid adapter as opposed to a speed booster. I have no problem with speed boosters, but just you get quite a bit more control with a helicoid adapter than you would a speed booster, even though you are losing the full frame optics. But you can see great saturation, great saturation. The bokeh is smooth. It's not distracting. I do enjoy busier and more textured bokeh just because you can make a little bit more bold statements in the photography. But here, it's just the destroyer of worlds. It's like the whole world doesn't exist, and then it slowly aligns into your plane of focus, and then goes back to an ethereal wasteland. Let me. There we go. Let me turn off processing. So even with my log profile, you can see just how beautiful this lens is rendering the colors. And this is straight out of camera, which is, in my opinion, very, very impressive. These reds are, it's so deep. The contrast between the highlights and the shadows on the rose is, I would say, immaculate. Even in the background, we're still getting great saturation. The contrast on the stem, you can see how it just pops right up from the background. Like, the fact that this image is straight out of camera is very, very impressive. Very impressive. I do love me some blue shadows, though. Here, another great example. I'm not going to go too far into this one, but at infinity, still very sharp. Foreground, very sharp. Looks great. The colors, love these colors. Takumar colors. Again, I'm shooting in a log profile. You can see it's doing reds beautifully. Blues and greens are a little bit more muted. Yeah, you can see the reds really, really pop, though. One thing, and this is just a manual I only shoot manual primes. I don't use autofocus. It's not like a flex thing. That's just because I'm poor. So I've gotten pretty good at focusing on manual. I found myself missing more often than I would expect with this lens. I normally shoot at like 1.4, 1.8 on my 50, and I can catch focus I'm pretty confident in my ability to catch focus, but I found myself missing focus a little bit more on this. Um, I'm not really sure why. I think a lot of it has to do with how wide the plane of focus is. So there's even what we consider the plane of focus, there's a spectrum of in focus and out of focus within the plane of focus. And I think I'm so used to just working with really tight plane of focuses. So if something looks in focus, that I assume that it's in focus because there's not much of a spectrum. But with such a wide plane of focus, I think I'm just putting it just on the edge of focus, what we would consider in focus. And with these images, it ends up working out, but it's this is for me personally, not necessarily a critique of the lens. Let's keep going. I like this shot. So cliche. It's just, I admit it's such a cliche shot, but it gives you a good example. Again, with the helicoid adapter, you can get very, very good sharpness in the center. And then, what is this? Backgrounds don't exist. Backgrounds are just gradients. This photo particularly, I love swirly bokeh, but I'm on a crop sensor, so like I gotta work hard to get it. I was not expecting to get swirly bokeh out of this lens. Like, real talk, look at this. Look at that. I'm on a crop sensor. Imagine what this is on a full frame. This would have been a tornado on a full frame. Crazy. Crazy. And I think that's only at this distance, because you could see the lines on the pagoda in the background are straight. The lines in the foreground are straight. But I think there's just a sweet spot distance on this lens. With most lenses that have swirly bokeh, there is. But man, this image alone is a reason I would buy this lens, just to have access to swirly bokeh on a crop sensor. And I just like how the contrast looks in split tone black and white. I love split tone. Here, a great example of the colors. Look at this, straight out of camera. Look at these reds. We can even zoom in a little bit more. Look at all that detail. Like this is straight out of camera. Look at these colors. Look at these colors. It's crazy. Another great one. Look at this is stop down. Great detail. Great sharpness. Little bit of color fringing here, but honestly, when I was processing this, I didn't even notice it. But yeah, we got a little bit of color fringing. I'm pretty sure this one was wide open, because at this time I was doing some background stuff, bokeh stuff. So just a little bit of color fringing, but at 3.5, I mean, really, what do you expect? It's not terrible. Yeah, the original. Actually, I kind of brought out the color fringing with my edit. One of the major problems I had with the 28 that I just tried before this was the distortion. There was a lot of distortion, and I'm on a crop sensor, and even I was seeing visual distortion. And I know a 28 is an ultra wide, so you're gonna expect a little bit of distortion, but these lines are straight on a 35, and that's only a 7mm difference. So yeah, the level of distortion on this lens is nothing compared to the Takumar 28. This is just a test. Compositionally, I'm not the biggest fan of this image, but one of the reasons I want to get a wide angle is so I can do landscape when I go traveling, because a 50 on a crop sensor is like an 85, and then that's just a peak of a mountain. There's no context. So at infinity, very sharp. Foreground, very sharp. Actually, I wouldn't say very sharp, but quite sharp, pretty sharp. Original. Yeah. I'm happy with this for landscape photography. Another great example of the colors you can get. It's a rainy, foggy day, so contrast isn't going to be amazing. And this lens really pops on the reds. Yellows are okay. Yellows are okay. But with a little bit of processing, you can just make it just go boom. Here's some images. I got swirly bokeh again here. This is where I originally noticed it when I was shooting. I was really having trouble hitting focus. I mean, shooting butterflies is kind of hard in general because they're just going to move away. So you're more focused on keeping the butterfly in shot. But yeah, I was missing focus more than I normally do. And I could shoot butterflies at 1.4 on the 50, and like I hit. No flex, but like I'm poor, so like I got really good at using manual focus. But I found myself missing more often than not. It's crazy. Like this, I completely missed the flower here. This is one of my favorite shots, but again, the whole thing is not in focus. Like, it works though, just because there's such great contrast. But nothing's really perfectly sharp. Like, yeah. These straight out of camera. Look at this. Look at this, straight out of camera. My big problem with Takumars, as I said before, their highlights are a little bit harsh, and some people like it, but it can add, it can make things that are dry look wet, and it can make things that are wet look white. So I almost always turn down the highlights, and I overuse blue shadows. Excuse me. Again, straight out of camera. This is insane. Contrast is immaculate. We could see individual cells now. The saturation, perfect. I wouldn't say perfect, but saturation, sharpness, really, for an old lens that cost $40 to $50, this is way more than you'll ever need. If you're looking to drop $50 on a lens, you don't deserve this. Like, you could get, like, this is worth way more than $50 relative to modern day optics. Here's a good example of the highlights, how the highlights look. I underexposed this so I could catch a good range on the highlights. But look how they're just so strong. Like, the way it handles highlights, even right here, it's just they're a little bit harsh. I have this problem with most Takumars. If we pull them down a little bit, you can get a little bit more balanced image. But even then, I don't know. I like this image. Compositionally, it's okay. But it's a really good example of the highlights. Okay, that's the rest of the images. I'm gonna give this lens a 9.5 out of 10. That's on the scale of vintage lenses. I don't really want to compare it to a modern like Sigma art lens or anything like that. But I'm gonna give this solid 9.5 out of 10. If the highlights weren't as harsh, I would give this a 10 out of 10. For image quality, build quality is not the best Takumar I've ever had. The copy I have has been a little bit beat up, but the focus ring is a little bit looser. It might just be my copy. So I don't really want to give a build quality judgment, because every other Takumar I've ever put in my hand felt amazing, was one of the best feeling lenses in hand that I've ever felt. Every one of them. So yeah, if you made it this far in the video, my name's Alan. Thank you for watching. I live in Hanoi, Vietnam. I'm a sound engineer and photographer. I'm currently making quite a bit of content related to the architectural history of North Vietnam and just general daily life in Hanoi. If that's something you're interested in, I'd love a subscribe. It'd really help me out right now, trying to get this channel off the ground. Vote in your local elections, and thank you. Goodbye.